Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets have just 7 games remaining, but so much can still be learned, not only for their playoff future this season, but which players on this roster can cement their roles going forward. We take a look at Cam Johnson, beyond Mikal Bridges and Nicholas Claxton, into Royce O'Neal, and even an eye on David Duke Jr. as we ponder on what Edmond Sumner could be as well. We'll break it all down next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I am Adam Armbrecht on a Thursday morning, nonetheless, talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball and also covering the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast and your New Jersey Devils on the Devils Puck Luck podcast as well. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We're free on all those great platforms. And friends, we come in with actually a few things to do here because off of Doug's solo episode where he discussed Ben Simmons and him being shut down for the season, what it means, and, just the general state of what still remains a very interesting facet to the Brooklyn Nets future. And when you trade away your superstars and you kind of reset your timeline, it's not often, one, as we said before, that you reset your timeline mid-season and trade away a player of Kevin Durant's caliber, of Kyrie Irving's caliber, and then still have another guy making $35 million a year that represents a big question mark. So you'll listen to that episode. We're not going to really talk at all about Ben Simmons today because, one, he's shut down for the season and not going to help us right now. And two, I thought it was interesting to look at a few things regarding the roster, how players have performed of late, and whether or not we think what happens over the remainder of the season will have an impact on the front office and how they look at certain players on this squad. Before we do that, though, it is worth noting that when I went over and just thought, you know what, I'll check the old score sheets before we dive in today. And when I checked them, maybe you were watching some of these games. Atlanta beat Cleveland last night. Toronto beat Miami last night as well. Orlando couldn't beat Memphis, just in case we were seeing if they were really on an upward trend. And when we go inside the standings, just to take that brief updating look at where Brooklyn is and how they fare, still sit there in that 6th seed. The loss for Miami gives them the half-game lead over top of them now. Atlanta's still 2 games back of Miami and 2.5 games back of Brooklyn, so that doesn't feel like that's in any risk. And then the New York Knicks have that 2.5 game lead over top of us in the 5 seed. So effectively, it looks like things are starting to cement themselves. We still have the battle with Miami over the remainder of our schedule, but it's always great when you're not playing basketball to see teams around you that could start to make it even more difficult for you have losses, right? That's what we're hoping for here. So that panned out pretty well for Brooklyn, obviously. We know that coming up in their remaining schedule, they're going to have a handful of very winnable games starting tonight with the Houston Rockets, a must win. We always hate to put that kind of label on any game, but when you look over the remaining games for Brooklyn, Houston, and then that Atlanta matchup, I guess certainly you can make the case if Brooklyn were to lose tonight and then followed up with a loss to Atlanta, it starts to make things a little bit hairier. But with Utah, Minnesota, Detroit, Orlando, and the 76ers potentially resting to close out the year, it starts tonight by getting a key win inside of these final 7 games that can, I'd probably say what? And we talked about this the other day. 3 wins, 4 wins might be enough. You're always watching what Miami is doing. For every win that they get, you got to stay just a hair ahead of them. And there's easily 4 wins out there for Brooklyn. It's just hard to say that there are easy wins when we know they've lost 6 out of their last 7 games. But they have won 3 out of their last 9. So that, if you want to work the ratio that way, that's where we stand in the standings. But beyond that, the other thing that we've been talking about is the performances of players on this roster and what we think they're going to be down the stretch of this season into the play-in playoff games and then beyond. And there's certain players that we can easily push aside, and that's exactly what we're going to do. We're not going to talk about Mikal Bridges, who's been an absolute explosion since coming over to Brooklyn from Phoenix. We're not going to talk about Nicholas Claxton, who's had a phenomenal year and who's shown even beyond. The one thing I will mention about him is even beyond showing the growth in certain areas that we liked. I think earlier in the season and when you're surrounding the superstars and it feels like your play is directly impacting deep playoff run basketball. Now you look at him, and at least for me, you're watching the little areas, the turning and facing up against the defender, right? Taking guys off a dribble, going coast to coast off defensive rebounds. There is still an athleticism, especially on the offensive end, and a skill set that I think we're going to see evolve with him going forward. That going into next season, we'll see that next evolution of his game. And that's probably the most exciting thing for me. Like, even with Mikal Bridges and what he's been doing, Nicholas Claxton will be going into his 5th season and very much still have untapped potential inside of it. The one other note that I'll make about him very quickly here, and we'll see if these stat lines bear out. In the month of March, for whatever it's worth, on the season right now, Nicholas Claxton's shooting just 53% from the free throw line. And that would be worse than last year, which would be really devastating given that he reworked his shot and wanted to improve in that area. But he was 62% in the month of March. And inside of that, there is only 2-3 games where he shot below 50%. Now, the volume hasn't been there. We've talked about and will talk about Day'Ron Sharpe and how often he gets to the line in far fewer minutes. Never more than 5 in a game. 4 has kind of been, a few times there, averaging 3 free throw attempts per game, knocking down almost 2 for 3 consistently, right? That's 62% ratio. If he can make that the new baseline, if he can finish out the remaining 7 games still on that line, and then you can go back into February where he shot 67% actually from the free throw line, right? So the last 2 months have been a significant improvement for a player that was sub 50 or below in every other month of the season. So Nicholas Claxton's turned the corner in that area of his game as well. But we're not going to talk about him. In spite of that, we're not going to talk about him. There is, though, then everybody else. To me, those 2 players are at the core of what you want to do going forward. And then everybody else, to whatever degree, has question marks, curiosities, or factors that greatly impact how they're going to move forward with this franchise. First and foremost being Cam Johnson. So coming up here in a second, we'll look at the young players, the veterans that came over in this trade, the veterans that remain on this roster, and then the young pool of talent and whether or not they've shown enough to be a part of it, shown enough to be a part of a trade, or ultimately are just, maybe a part of that group that says, yes, it was a good run while you were here, but at some point you will fall by the wayside. Before we get into that, though, I'm going to tell you about something that I've told you about before. And that is, of course, the Ultimate Pro Basketball GM. You know that the Ultimate Pro Basketball GM is the coolest game that you may play, and I've certainly played in a long time. I enjoyed it with NFL, I enjoy it with NBA, I enjoy it with MLB. Doing the nuts and bolts, a lot of the off-season work, roster construction, drafting, signing players, making trades, all of those things that matter to trying to win a championship. And that's exactly what you can do when you download the Ultimate GM Basketball, NBA GM app right now. All of this is a challenging and realistic game world. I've said that I think I'm in like season number 6 now. There's like a little bit of an internal network competition. I'm in the playoffs. I've gone to the conference finals. I cannot get over the hump to the finals yet. I'm debating whether or not I trade away a young, talented player in order to try to acquire that elite level veteran that I know can get me over the top. And all of this, of course, is available in Ultimate Pro Basketball GM, and it's completely free and playable online. You can play it on the go as you want, when you want. So you go over to Locked On Nets listeners, will get a 100% free boost on their franchise when using promo code Locked On in the game store. So make sure to check it out. To download the game, you can visit probasketballgm.com, scan the code, or look it up on the app stores. That's probasketballgm.com. Ultimate Basketball GM. Start your dynasty today. All right. So when we talk about this roster and what it means in behind the core players that you think are automatically, no matter what, hands down locked in here. And it's funny because the first thing you would say is, well, it has to be Mikal Bridges. And we talked about before, it has to be then Cam Johnson. And we mentioned this last episode, and I had an interaction over on Twitter with a longtime fan of the show and of the Brooklyn Nets. And we were saying, you're going into this offseason. He's going to want this $20+ million contract. It's difficult to look at the way that he's been playing of late and think that that's realistic. And they suggested, well, maybe if he plays a little bit, off here, we can start talking about 17 or 18 million instead of 2022. And obviously at that point, you want to base it on play. We could be saying maybe it's more like 12, 13 million and not 22 million, not 18 million, not 17 million. And the other problem with that is if he now, Cam Johnson, goes on this run, as we've seen him of late, where, this is a guy that, we know that over the last handful of games, it's been okay. There's been times when you thought that's all, good enough. The 16, 14, 10 lines that he had in losses against Sacramento, Denver, Cleveland, playing 34, 35 minutes, going 4 of 11 from the field, but a combined over, this is a random 3-game sample size, and you could expand it out and make it look worse, and going 5 of 16 from beyond the arc when that needs to be a consistent area of your game. Like there's been moments, there's been plenty of situations here where you look at him and you think he's far closer to a Dorian Finney-Smith category right now than he is to a Spencer Dinwiddie, than he is to a Royce O'Neal, who we're going to talk about here too. And that's just about consistency or evolving your game to be able to suit and fit the needs of this roster. I said before that I think maybe Cam Johnson is kind of that elevated Joe Harris, where he, yes, can be a three-point shooter, can do a little bit more on-ball, obviously, and then has the defensive ability. But the comparison is just that, does he need to be playing on a team that has superstars on it so that he can benefit the most? I think he's easily one of the guys that is suffering at the hands of not having a fully developed system yet, not being fully familiar with everyone, and maybe someone will clap back and say it's been more than enough here, or look over to Jock Vaughn and say, if the system isn't working, that's on the coach. That could be the case too. But I do think that an offseason would benefit him greatly. But as it stands right now, I can't just throw him into the category of being, yes, you're one of the core cornerstones, especially with the price associated with him. And we know the attachment to Mikal Bridges and why maybe it makes it a foregone conclusion that he has to be, is going to be a part of this roster. But it'll be interesting to see what happens with him as we go down this stretch. So in the final 7 games, what do I want to see? I want to see something that looks a little bit like the Saturday night game against Miami. Now, that's in 25 minutes, going 9 of 13, 70% from the field, and 5 of 8 from beyond the arc. I get it. That's probably too much, right? But even go back to that Cleveland loss where I said I lumped it in there because there were some struggles inside of it. But that's a night where he went 34 minutes, 4 of 11, 2 of 4 from beyond the arc, got to the line 6 times. I actually think that that's pretty critical for him because there's been stretches when he's had 10 trips, 4, 9, 8 trips to the line here, right? So that ability to attack at the basket is a part of his game that I think he needs to start doing more consistently. So can he start to show that a little bit more over the last 7 games of this season? I'd like to see it. But that Cleveland matchup, as I said, also had 3 rebounds in that game. Sandwiched around that against Miami in the first Cleveland matchup, 4 assists, had a couple of steals. That part of his game has been here pretty consistently. Prior to the Orlando loss, he had 3, 6, 9 games in a row with at least 1 steal, and had that absolutely electric performance against Denver where he came up with 4 steals and the 6 rebounds as well. These are the things that I think he needs to pad out and show the consistency of, just even from a points scored standpoint. Back in reverse order here, 10, 23, 5, 16, 14, 10, 23, 14, 15, 8. It's just, if you're going to be a part of this core going forward, based on your skill set, your age, everything involved here, you need to be a player for me that is kicking in a minimum on a night in, night out basis, 15 points a night, got to give me 4 to 6 rebounds a night, got to give me a couple assists if that's what happens there. And then most importantly, again, get to the free throw line here. And that's a way that you actually can move the needle on his scoring lines, because every game where he's gotten to the line successfully, you look back at 16 points in a night when he got to the line 6 times. So it takes an okay 4 of 11 shooting night and makes it a pretty good contribution. 6 of 8 going back to the loss against OKC. That's a 23-point night. So I need consistency out of Cam Johnson. And I need to see it happening over these last 7 games if we're going to get to this offseason and have that discussion. Another guy, when we talk about the new players in here, is Dorian Finney-Smith. Frankly, I don't know if there's anything that he's going to show me over these last 7 games. I'm going to keep it simple on him. I think he's a player that's best suited to be a veteran, coming off the bench, a guy that can do things defensively for you. In theory, can knock down 3-pointers, although he has not done it at all as a Brooklyn Net. And beyond that, it's, a veteran, experienced player that people can lean on. That's where he should be. And I don't really see anything beyond that. It's a nice team-friendly contract. I could potentially see where maybe he actually becomes the part of a mechanism that allows you to make adjustments to this roster in the offseason because it's such a low cost on the books. Royce O'Neal, talked about him. I believe he should be in the starting lineup. I've really liked his game. This is the veteran side of things. I think this group of players comes into the who came over in the trade and who was most impacted by the trade. Royce O'Neal falls into that category because he went from being a starter to being a bench player. And in doing so, he just kept on having the same level of consistency. So all I really need from Royce O'Neal over the last 7 games is keep showing what you've been doing. This is a guy that in the last 5 has played 24 or more minutes. He shot good, solid, I'll say, from the field. Remember, the beginning of the month was a little bit worse there. The first 3 games of March, he shot combined, 6 of 22, 6 of 23. So he had a rough start to the month, certainly. But over these last 5, he's shooting 4 and 9 from the field, 2 of 4, around 50%. The three-point shooting is come and gone, gets to the line a couple of times, but really it's the rebound categories I like. It's the assist categories that I like. We know he's been a little bit of a ball handler. He's a guy that I've been surprised to say this season, I think you should put him back in the starting lineup over Dorian Finney-Smith. But going forward, I think he's still a great guy to have coming in off the bench and have that veteran presence. So all I need to see is the continued consistency from Royce O'Neal, and I can check the box for him fairly easily. The last guy that comes in here that we'll cover in this group is obviously Spencer Dinwiddie. And I've already gone on record. I think I went on record, I don't know, last week sometime, maybe the beginning of this week. I don't know. The days get blurred together. But I had said that when you go back and look at Spencer Dinwiddie and think about what he was coming in back to Brooklyn, the areas that it seemed like he was going to struggle initially, and then what he's evolved his game into. Once you start having that conversation around, now we're going to go ahead and gloss over the 0 of 11 shooting performance in his last game against Orlando. But we know, right? Double-digit assists in 5 out of the last 8 games. He's had monster performances in terms of being a table setter for this team. Asking him over the last 7 games to show a level of control, self-control when it comes to the refs and the calls and the arguing and all those things, I'm not going to bother with that. But the bottom line is all he needs to do again here is show me that was a blip on the radar, that poor performance against Orlando, and get yourself right back on track. I went on record as saying I think that you want him to be a part of this team beyond next season, even with that contract and not fully guaranteed money. Do I want him on the books at 20+ million? No. Do I want him on there as the starting point guard? No. But do I love him, as being able to slide over into the 2 guard at times and being able to back himself into the second unit? And then when you need him to come in, play that lead role there and know that he can do all phases for you on both ends of the floor consistently? Yes. So I think that he's already kind of cemented himself, but just more consistency from him. It's why I throw Dinwiddie in at the back end. Coming up here in a second, though, it's about Day'Ron Sharpe. It's about Edmond Sumner. And we can talk about Joe Harris if we want. I'll actually give a thought on him. But it's also about another player in David Duke Jr. that we're not going to learn anything about down the stretch of this season. But I did start to have a fascinating thought. And obviously a guy like Yuta Watanabe as well. We'll dive into the expectations for these players coming up as we continue our Locked On Nets episode. But first, we've got to tell you, my good friends, about our other good friends. And that would, of course, be FanDuel. FanDuel, it's the time of year to get involved, man. The playoffs are coming for the NBA. The playoffs are coming for the NHL. And you know that also, the March Madness is in full swing here too. And you could be a part of it here because right now FanDuel is giving new customers a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's a $1,000 bet or several bets up to $1,000 in bet bonus bets if your first bet does not win. So that means you can go in and put a $1,000 bet. Maybe you should have done it more smartly and put it on some of these guys in the tournament for March Madness that were absolutely beating the odds. Some guys you couldn't even find odds, but you can just go to FanDuel.com/locked-on and sign up today to claim your no sweat first bet. Then you can wager on everything from the money line to the point spreads to which team will be ultimately winning the championship there. And of course, again, NBA, you can talk about it. Every single night, there's going to be an opportunity to talk about Mikal Bridges trying to go over a 40-point performance, or Nicholas Claxton, double-digit rebounds, or Spencer Dinwiddie going maybe for a triple-double, maybe one triple-double down the stretch. Which game will it be? Maybe against the Rockets. We don't know for sure. It's all in the app, and it's all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy. So don't miss your shot for the no-sweat first bet and up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/locked-on to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel. And if that had been up there, you would have seen FanDuel. There it is, right across the bottom, in case you need the information. But on the other side of it, maybe we just want to get rid of it and have Locked On Nets staring you in the face as we close things out, talking about some of the young players in this group. So at its surface, I'm talking about Mikal Bridges and Nicholas Claxton being your core. Cam Johnson fundamentally feeling like he's going to be, but still having a lot to prove. Spencer Dinwiddie being a viable, productive option to keep around this roster beyond next season. And a player like Royce O'Neal continuing over the final 7 games, all these players continue to check the boxes that we've categorized them into. But then there's the weird thing that comes up here. And that's a player like Day'Ron Sharpe. Let's just start with him. Because seemingly out of nowhere, and we've always seen what he's been capable of doing. This is a guy that goes in high energy. He's going to give you big rebounds, but the fouls are going to get picked up there quite frequently, quite quickly, and you're going to find yourself sitting on the bench. In the month of March, including a couple of really big minute games, like against the Milwaukee Bucks when they sat absolutely everybody, and he went 5 of 13 from the field and gave you 4 rebounds and 2 assists and 11 points. And, you know, the volume didn't quite increase with the minute shares in that particular matchup. But in the month of March, he's averaging 17 minutes a game, 54 from the field, 40% from beyond the arc, which, again, you can say is not enough to really be a sample size. Well, you know, listen, he's gone 2 of 5 from the field. It at least means that on a game-to-game basis, there's 1 or 2 3-point attempts, and depending on when they come, chucking one up late, I'd like to see him do it more frequently early. The other thing that I've liked about it is, especially starting in the mid there against Denver, starting with Denver, 3 of 4 from the line, back-to-back games against Cleveland. Then he came back around against Miami and Orlando, 5 of 5 times over those 2 games combined. That's certainly something that it looks like he can build on and build with consistency. Remember, he's a guy that coming out of college, we talked with Candace Cooper, Locked On ACC on the network, really has done a nice job and knows from living in Carolina, specifically Day'Ron Sharpe's game. If you go back and think about just last year, the free throw shooting was 58%. Now it's 66%, almost 67%. And that's 32 games with 8 starts last year, 41 games with 2 starts this year. You talk about the three-point shooting. Again, the sample size is small, but it went from just 28% last year to 54% this year. This is exactly the trajectory that we talked about with him when he came out. Now, since then, we've had a lot of different discussions on what he can or cannot be. But I'm in firm belief that all I need from Day'Ron Sharpe now over the remainder of this season is to just show up and continue to do what you've been doing here over the month of, not even the month of March, over the last 5-6 games. If you can do that, then you're going to put yourself into a position where you can look at Day'Ron Sharpe as being a pseudo backup center and also someone in the right combinations with the perimeter game can maybe even be on the court and share it with another more pure traditional center or a more traditional stretch big that has the pure perimeter stroke and can do that as well. He still has areas of his game in the pick and roll, right? Defensively, sometimes get lost on assignments. I get it. But this has somewhat been night and day when you think about the fact that Day'Ron Sharpe, as I said, averaged 17 minutes this month. The month before averaged just 13. The month before 11. The month before 9. The month before 4. So, you know, you go back to October, he averaged 14 minutes to start the season and then went away. Those first 5 games, it was like they were a mirage because then after that, he's single-digit minutes for every single game but one in November. And then had one massive game, the 9.4 minutes in the month of December. That's because he played 32 against the Pacers that month. Everything else was 6 or fewer. So he really got buried. And, but the thing that we keep trying to come back to, or I keep trying to come back to, is there is a developmental process for these players, and you need to be patient. So just keep showing me consistency. Show me that you can go out the remaining 7 games and always give me 15 minutes, always give me 3 or 4 trips to the line, and always give me 6, 7 rebounds across it, and try to push for 10 points a game if you can. 10 points in 15 minutes is a heck of a lot. We understand that. But even when he gave us these last 2 games, is kind of a perfect stat line. 15 minutes, 6 to 8 rebounds, 8 to 9 points, getting to the line a few times. I can not only live with that, I can love that, and a couple of blocks, 1 in each of those games respectively. His game's developed. And I think we are very close, put that together this last run of the season, of saying he can be a part, a young player on the bench for this team going forward, and we can be happy about that. Edmond Sumner is the interesting one that I think we'll close out on here. I wanted to talk about Yuta Watanabe. We'll save it for the offseason, mostly because I don't think, who knows, with the way Jacque Vaughn has worked rotations here, maybe he will see enough run over these last 7 games that we can make a stronger assessment about, can this guy function on the new version of the team, on the non-superstar version of the team? Because in recent games, it's fair to say, 12 minutes against Orlando, 1 of 3, right? 5 rebounds, nothing really doing here. Nothing really going on in the Cleveland game. 13 minutes, 2 of 3 from the field, had a couple of assists, had a couple steals. I think there's enough there, and maybe the age and the skill set is just right for him to still be a part of this roster going forward. I wouldn't have any problem with it. Point being is I don't think we're going to see a big enough sample size over 7 games to make anything significant in terms of a thought process on him. I'd love to see him get 15 minutes consistently every game the rest of the way and see if that volume increases, see if he can impact the game when there aren't superstars out on the floor ahead of him, even if we think Mikal Bridges is right on the edge of it. But Edmond Sumner to me is the interesting one. And I mentioned at the top that not only Edmond Sumner, but David Duke Jr. was a fascinating person just to mention here. And the reason being is we know that that Edmond Sumner finally gets himself out onto the floor the other night. And we all get the sample size that we've been clamoring for Jacque Vaughn to allow him to do. Shows up, Miami, 129-100 win, 15 minutes, 4 of 7, 1 of 2 from beyond the arc, 3 of 3 at the line, had a rebound in that game, 12 points, and only took 2 personal fouls across it, the defensive value that he brings. And we loved it. We were elated by it, right? And you can even go back, by the way, and look at the game against Milwaukee, where he, in 13 minutes, just 2 of 7 from the field, but got to the line 4 times, rebound and assist, 9 points. Even that sample size is still a positive. But when he finally checks back in after not playing since the Sacramento game against the Kings and gives you that sample size, you go, yeah, this is what we want more of. And then he's not available for the next game. That's the biggest issue with Edmond Sumner and my outlook for him. And the only way that I could see moving the needle on my perception of him, and some fans have said, is this a guy that potentially could be a backup point guard for this roster going forward, or a player coming off the bench in that type of role? Health is the biggest reason why I think it's going to be hard to say that he could do that. Remember, that's why the Brooklyn Nets were able to get him, because he had missed an entire season with the Pacers, worked his way back. He's a thin body. He plays as if he's a bulldozer, but he's really, a rake. And I think it's going to be hard for him to stay healthy consistently. Do I want to see a more sample size from him? Yes. And the way that you could move the needle, it'd be exactly that. Come back in healthy, immediately starting tonight. I haven't checked to see if he's going to be back for this game against the Rockets. 7 games, show up, give me 12 to 15 minutes every single game for 7 straight games. Show me the consistent shooting touch, getting to the free throw line, impacting the game defensively. And I'll say, hey, let's get you to the offseason. Let's continue to try to make sure that you can be a healthy player for you and you can contribute. I have my reservations that you can rely on him in that way. And that's why I do bring up David Duke Jr. You may be saying, Adam, who cares? David Duke Jr. doesn't play up with the Brooklyn Nets. But this is something that we've talked about going back to Day'Ron Sharpe, going back to Cam Thomas. When you go in and look that this season with the Long Island Nets in 22 games, David Duke Jr. is averaging 34 minutes, 22 points a game. He's knocking down 47% from the field. He's knocking down 33% from beyond the arc, which is not great, but maybe buildable when it comes to the pro level. And he's also getting to the line 4 times a game and knocking down 80%. He has 6 rebounds to go along with it. He has almost 4 assists per game to go along with it. His plus minus is 4.6. And I know it's all at the G League level. But when you go in and look at David Duke Jr. on off court when it comes to playing with the Brooklyn Nets, when he's on the court, it's been interesting. The net rating is 108 offensively, 110 defensively, a net negative when he's on the floor in just 180 minutes. I just wonder if in the same way that we have talked about Cam Thomas, and we'll see what happens with him. I'm not discussing him because it's not about what he could show us. It's about whether or not he gets the opportunity to show us. And then if so, does he continue to show the all-around consistent game? But I think we know what Cam Thomas is. It's just a matter of whether or not he fits the Nets or fits their desires or he's meeting their goals, whatever. We're leaving him out of this. But with David Duke Jr., I don't know if it's unreasonable to say that his timeline is longer, but not dissimilar from a Day'Ron Sharpe. In the sense of, can he continue to develop and grow and become a player that has an NBA role? Because when you look at what his skill set is, you can make the case that, yes, like he's a guy deserving of minutes the same way that Edmond Sumner could be deserving of minutes. Now, Edmond Sumner's shown it at the NBA level and shown it with consistency. So that's why he gets the look, and that's why he is going to get the look down the stretch here. I'm not advocating for David Duke Jr. to be on the roster here and playing minutes for the last 7 games. But I am watching what he did in the G League, and I am thinking about what's possible, which includes going back to that Milwaukee game. This is such a good sample, given that we know we rested so many players in that one. In 27 minutes, 6 of 11 from the field, 1 of 2 from beyond the arc, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, 13 points. Can he do that every single night at the NBA level? Probably not. But is David Duke Jr. a guy capable of being in the bench rotation for the NBA roster? This will shock Doug Norrie. I think maybe he is. And I'd be very curious. All this theme was, what did these players show us over the last 7 games? That isn't what I'm asking of David Duke Jr., but I am tying it in to Edmond Sumner. If you think that he can show you something that cements what he could be going forward for this team, I wonder if the Nets in their mind, waiting in the wings, say, we do have options here. We do have young players in our roster, in our system, that maybe 3 months ago, 2 months ago at the deadline, we would have looked and said, yeah, but we want veterans. We want the TJ Warrens of the world. We want the guys that are going to surround our superstars. But now you can look at it a little bit differently. Decisions that get made this offseason are going to be fascinating to watch. But he's certainly a guy that I think maybe will factor in from an organizational perspective more than we're considering it right now. Guys like Seth Curry can't show me anything over the last 7 games. Don't worry about it. A guy like Joe Harris, I'll save that discussion for the offseason because I think that my opinion on him is going to potentially ruffle some feathers when it comes to the fan base. But that is for the offseason legitimately. Over these last 7 games, there are no less than 5 players on this roster that can confirm or deny what they're going to be going forward. And ironically, it is about more than just showing the consistent level of play. It also comes in, are you getting wins? Are you securing playoff positions, right? This is a well below 500 team since the trade deadline. There are missing pieces to this roster. But you got to show me that you're not too far off from being a 500 team, an above 500 team, if I want to be convinced that these guys plus another key addition can actually be a needle mover next season. It all starts tonight against the Houston Rockets, my friends. We will be back in right after that with a live post game, as we always do. That's why you got to be over on YouTube, subscribing, turning on your alerts so you know when we're going live, getting us on your podcast feeds wherever you get those needs fulfilled. And as always, when there is no Doug Norrie, there is no quote short of saying, I miss my friend. And I can't wait until he's back here so we can keep talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball. All right, everybody, if you're here for the morning session, it's just the way the schedule worked out. So this is the way that I had to run it. I appreciate everyone that showed up here. So it's kind of a bonus, right? We normally don't do regular episodes live, but I'm here and it's happening. So if you're in the conversation and I do see a couple people asking some questions, we'll throw them up. I'll stick around for a few minutes before the rest of my day fires off with everything else. What do you see as the inconsistency factors overall, causes and cures for this team? Again, if it's on a high team level, it's You don't have secondary ball handlers. You don't have, a viable option to run the offense beyond Spencer Dinwiddie. And right now, you have a redundancy around certain skill sets, like I mentioned with Adorian Finney-Smith. Yes, is he a solid plus defender? He is. But is he a guy that's going to take dudes off the dribble offensively? No. Is he a guy that is finding his rhythm from 3-point? No. Right? So all of a sudden, it's positive in one area, but a frustration in another. That's what prevents the consistency on a night in, night out basis for this team. When some guys are on, then all of a sudden it works. When some guys are off, it doesn't. And it's why, like you're seeing here, we talk about 9-man rotations. It's why we say, like, this is the reason why Edmond Sumner should get a little more run. It's the reason why Yuta Watanabe should be in the mix of this conversation, right? Because when you go through and say Spencer Dinwiddie, Bridges, Johnson, Finney-Smith, and Claxton are your starting five, and then I don't want to see Seth Curry, but I do want to see Joe Harris at whatever level, and you could say it should be marginal at best, just given where he is in this season, but he's been good. He's been productive in that 3-point shot when we've asked him to do exactly what he's known for and not what he is incapable of doing. But Harris, O'Neal, and then Day'Ron Sharpe makes 8. And then you throw in a little bit of Edmond Sumner could make 9. And you could even make the case that on a night in, night out basis, Yuta Watanabe, you wouldn't mind having him in the mix there. But the 9-man rotation, that's effectively what you get down to, right? And it's the only adjustment here is Edmond Sumner, no Seth Curry. That's the easy one. Yeah, this is a funny one too, because you mentioned, can you build up some muscle? We always say this about, like, Doug and I talked about this with Mikal Bridges. So what's the one area of his game? And Doug said, very clear to him, needs to get bigger. But Mikal Bridges is 26, 27 years old. So it's not like this dude is just going to all of a sudden, right? We've seen Nicholas Claxton like incrementally put on muscle mass because of the position he plays. Edmond Sumner is 27 years old. So his body, his frame is his frame. He's not going to change physically how he looks. This question, yeah, 100. And I see you there. I see you down there with the Nick Claxton. Exactly. But again, young player developing and growing his NBA body, veteran player who's played his entire career in a certain mold, right? It'd be like saying, although it's I flashed the Michael Jordan, right, when he changed his body shape. But it'd be like saying Kevin Durant is now going to go put on muscle mass, right? Like at some point you are who you are. Who gets moved in the offseason? I avoided getting into this too much. There's certain guys like Seth Curry whose contract is going to be up. We'll dive into this deeper, but I'll tell you right now that like the Joe Harris one is fascinating to me. It depends on what happens in other areas. Obviously, that money you want to move off of it, but I can make a case for both things where you're going to trim the fat on a lot of guys from a contract standpoint. And also that depending on how the season finishes, you can approach the start of next season saying, well, let's see what happens here. Let's see the interest we get for different players, et cetera, right? Right now, as it stands, you have Royce O'Neal under contract next year for 9.5. You have Nick Claxton, 8.75. Not these guys are going anywhere. Patty Mills, that's a guy you probably want to move on from, obviously, but I don't have a guarantee that he won't just be making $6.8 million. I assume that he'll be gone. We know the Cam Johnson situation. Yuta Watanabe probably going to be gone, and that's why I didn't spend time on him, because I just think I like him. Whether it's the fact that you have Dorian Finney-Smith here now, or that you're going to just go get another body. I'd be surprised if he was back. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe he likes it here, and then you have to really sell him on that there's a role for him, a 15-minute role. But that's what he is, a bench role player that can be really functional. The 19, almost 20 million for Joe Harris looms really large. The 20 million for Spencer Dinwiddie looms really large. So those are like, the easy ones would be Curry, Mills, and Yuta Watanabe. Edmond Sumner, by the way, is under contract next year, so that makes it an easy one as well to hold on to him. But those are just like the blanket statement ones. And then there's other things like, would you make a move, right? And then Dorian Finney-Smith could be on the table. Joe Harris could be the money on the table as well. I don't know. There's no reason that this would happen. And I don't mean that in any other way than it's just not something that's going to happen. Name 3 players you would like to see on this team, not a superstar. You know what? This is actually a good one. So I didn't do this yet. I won't answer you in this moment, Iceman, but this is a really good question, and it's exactly what I started thinking about. Because everyone's saying, do you package everything up and go get player X, superstar Y? I actually think that it's more interesting to do what you're saying. 2 or 3 guys that are not superstars, but that change the dynamic of these rotations, that change what this team can be functionally even before you add another pure superstar. So I will take a look at that. I don't know if we'll do it before the season ends, but that will be upcoming. And I'm a big fan of that. Sorry, that wasn't the one. I think Dwight is in Taiwan. This was the Claude Smith one that says, will he still be playing Javon Carter and Steve Nash? Yeah, I think they might be. I'm not sure. I think I know Steve Nash will be getting paid. I don't know if Javon Carter is done yet or not. They probably mention it here. Let's take a little peek down the list. Do we get any? It won't tell me. It doesn't tell me in here just real quick at first glance. Yeah, we'll look into that too, though. Probably is. What's the big deal? What's the big deal if you're paying some guys? But yeah, just to Iceman's point, though, it's definitely an interesting one to think about. I'm not gonna. Maybe I'll take a little peek here. I'll take a little peek here. There was a couple of guys, like the one guy, Markelle Fultz was like a name that jumped out after the Orlando game. Some people have, I think, already kind of mentioned that. Like, he's a nice targetable player. I think his last year of his deal is he's not a multi-year contract. But he was like an interesting one because the number's not going to be insane. You're never going to mistake him for a superstar, but he's a good facilitator. Like that, that's the kind of guy that I think moves the needle for this team. And it's not going to be the DeJounte Murrays of the world that some people are saying the Nets should go trade for, obviously. Yeah, what would they have? That's an interesting one. Looking through, I wouldn't hate. There's a restricted free agent. He's had injuries as well. I really like Kobe White, plays for Chicago, obviously. He's had problems staying healthy. When he's on the court, though, I've always enjoyed his game. I'm doing like the old Passover here. Oh, it looks like so Javon Carter will be an unrestricted free agent. So that's it. It's all over. Whatever they were paying him will be moved on from, if not already. Again, I think it was. I think his contract was up and then they re-signed him, but doesn't really matter. Maybe Javon Carter will be brought back, huh? Why don't you bring him back? If you're going to pay him already, you might as well have him on the team. So there's guys like that that I think are interesting to potentially look at. Someone had mentioned, I think someone threw out like Trey Jones before, restricted free agent for the Spurs. For the most part, though, I am mentioning guys in the backcourt, right? I mean, I'd like to look around guys like that. And I think that more than anything, this is about, I'm actually seeing the comment from Ray, like it is about getting the right players. Like this is the Dorian Finney-Smith thing. His value is greatly diminished on a team like this as opposed to on a team with Luka. So, again, I can make the case, like, out of the 2 players, I would say for going forward purposes, I'd rather have Yuta Watanabe on the bench coming in for this team, maybe than Dorian Finney-Smith, because Yuta Watanabe has a little bit more of a versatile skill set to whatever level it plays to than Dorian Finney-Smith. So that would be my case there. Need to get down on Jaylen Brown, right? Well, that'd be the superstar route, and you can do that. So it'd be interesting. But anyway, all that to say, that's the perfect question. That's what we'll discuss in the offseason, because I think Doug and I are probably closer to being on the same page than not when it comes to, are the Nets going to make a massive move and a big splash this offseason, or are they going to try to see what develops here, what they add to the draft, where these draft picks end up landing? Yes, I know people are talking about Luka not being happy, all that good stuff. But I just think that it's going to be about seeing where they are in the offseason, seeing what players they bring in, and then reevaluating and reassessing, right? And then seeing where the market is to move off of certain contracts, like a Joe Harris's, like a Patty Mills, if you want to do that. That changes some of the money there as well. And yeah, I'll just, the final note there, I see it about Is Yuta injury prone? He is. He's had injuries over the course of start. And then, by the way, a lot of these guys fall into that category. Edmond Sumner, Yuta Watanabe. Are they talented? Yes. Do they have a fit on a lot of NBA teams? Of course they do. But the consistency and the availability is what matters most for them. Yuta was in and out a lot in this lineup because the style that he plays, it ends up getting some little nagging injuries here and there. Same thing for Edmond Sumner. So that's as big a factor as anything going forward. Like we always say, man, get us on YouTube, do all that good stuff. Thanks for joining me on a surprising and shocking early morning edition. And we'll be back again tonight following the Houston Rockets game, breaking down that matchup. Hopefully a win that gets the Nets on the right foot, gives them a little bit of an additional cushion ahead of Miami there, and continues to push to secure that 6th seed and what looks like will be lining up for that Philadelphia first round matchup. We're back later tonight talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball. Everybody be well in the meantime.